Death penalty, also known as capital punishment, has been around for thousands of years throughout history under many different names. And most historical records show that almost all primitive tribal practices included the death penalty as part of their justice system. An eye for an eye is a paraphrase in Hammurabi's code referring to death penalty in a legal document from ancient Babylonia, first of its kind in which 25 crimes were punishable by death. Since then, countries from all over the world have adopted and revoked this law on several occasions. And nowadays, more and more countries are getting rid of this punishment to be replaced by less harsh sentences due to the pressure from human rights organizations and international community. Many argue that the capital punishment could be abused by governments and can be used against vulnerable people for political gain. Others say that some executions take place after unfair trials in violation of international laws and standards. And this is the number one reason why so many people are against this law. Amnesty International reported that 2,591 were executed using this law in just 1 year in 53 countries. And aside from this law being used as a political tool, the fact that mistakes do happen in the justice system, in this particular case, people's lives are at stake, making it an irreversible mistake costing a life. The risk of executing an innocent person can never be eliminated, as records show that a great number of people sent to death row were later exonerated or released. But many nations from all over the world still practice executions and retain this law in their justice system. And here we'll see 10 countries with most executions. And stay tuned till the end of the video to see one country just recently passed a law that allowed death by stoning for men involved in a sexual relationship with each other. But before we start, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our videos that we upload every single day. Indonesia. One of the countries in the world that still retain the death penalty, Indonesia has a strict rule when it comes to drug offense, murder, and terrorism. In fact, Indonesia's anti-drug offense law is so strict that it accounts for most of the prisoners put to death. And terrorists often receive relatively light sentences of 10 to 20 years in jail, while those caught up with drugs are sentenced to death by a firing squad. And despite many promises made by the government in the past, executions are still taking place in the country. Some of the suspects spend many years before they are shot to death. Authorities in Indonesia argue that illicit drug use is growing as a result of drug trafficking, which is affecting their people's lives and productivity of their young population, and say that this is the only way to fight the spread of drug use. Egypt. In Egypt, several prominent cases have involved murder confessions obtained through torture, a means that was accepted by the courts and used to sentence the defendants to death. This type of investigations are tainted with possible errors that could result in irreversible and dangerous mistakes by taking the lives of innocent people. And in Egypt's case, there is an increase in death sentences in mass trials, and courts sentence dozens of defendants to death at the same time, giving room for mistakes. UN Rights Office urged the country to meet the highest standards of fairness and due process to prevent miscarriage of justice, as allegations of systematic torture come in great numbers. Human rights organizations condemn Egypt's trials as grossly unfair, and international observers have been accusing the government of controlling the judiciary and using it as a tool for silencing their opposition. Somalia. In Somalia, most of the executions are done by a firing squad, but Sharia courts still use beheading and stoning. A few years ago, there was a rise in executions as a result of the establishment of military courts and the expansion of the jihadist group Al-Shabaab. And Somalia, one of the most impoverished countries in the world, is also known for having a very weak judicial system. Some executions take place within a short amount of time after apprehension, sometimes in less than 2 weeks. This prevents the defendants from filing an appeal, and carrying out death sentences so rapidly makes it less likely for the case to be reviewed for a possible pardon or commutation. And even though Somali's government argues the importance of this sentence in fighting terrorism, the manner within which the justice system works to quickly execute people is clearly not justice. North Korea. The intense secrecy surrounding capital punishment makes it hard to get the exact figure of people put to death by the courts, especially in a tightly controlled countries like North Korea. The government says it used death penalties to deter violent crimes, but the reality is in North Korea, you can be sentenced to death for very bizarre crime charges like drinking alcohol. In fact, a North Korean official was executed by mortar shell for drinking during the 100-day mourning period for the late Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un, the son of the late leader and the current leader of North Korea, demanded the official to be obliterated with no trace of him behind. Other crimes include watching TV other than state medias, practicing religion, communicating with the outside world, and playing music that isn't about the regime. United Nations reports also show torture, arbitrary detention, enforced disappearances, and forced abortions. United States. 30 out of 50 states have capital punishment as a legal penalty, and is the only developed Western nation that still applies the death penalty. The United States is also the first to introduce lethal injection. The American death penalty is fragile, as death sentences and executions have been on a decline for a long time. Capital punishment has long been and continues to be controversial, and is declining in popularity and usage. The number of death sentences imposed annually nationwide has plummeted to a fraction of what they used to be, and the number of people getting clemency is growing each year. Demand from the public to abolish this sentence is forcing the government to stretch the due process and possibly give the defendants enough time before any action is taken against them. Still, the US is retaining its death penalty in 30 of its states. Pakistan. Every fourth person on death row in the world is in Pakistan. And even though the country has ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it has yet to ratify the abolition of the death penalty that seems to be very harsh in comparison with the other countries who still retain this law. The widespread use of torture to extract confessions from suspects by the police, rather than looking for other forms of evidence, is one of the criticisms this country gets when it comes to implementing the death penalty. The number of people on death row in Pakistan is one of the highest in the world and keeps growing because of the great number of crimes for which the capital punishment is prescribed. In addition, the arbitrariness, unfairness, and high risk of error in capital prosecutions in Pakistan has been documented extensively. Iraq. The Iraqi Judicial Assembly has relentlessly put out terrorism convictions since the war with the Islamic State came to an end, and captured thousands of fighters, supporters, and family members and accused them of the group's vicious 3-year rule over a third of the country. The death penalty still in place means that thousands of people may be given the capital punishment. In some extreme cases, these suspected ISIS members are sentenced to death only after being allowed to defend themselves for no longer than an hour. There is a lot of criticism coming towards Iraq's courts for failing to investigate some of the worst crimes committed by the Islamic State. And the death penalty that was commonly practiced by the government of Saddam Hussein still remains. For a nation that for more than 15 years suffered ISIS terrorists, the government and the public has very little appetite for leniency. Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has long been known to use different laws, including the death penalty, to silence dissent. This is especially true for the women of this kingdom who dare to voice their opinion. And executions have soared in Saudi following certain political events that have put its current reformist leader under immense pressure, which many argue that most of the sentences were politically motivated. The recent killing of a prominent journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, in Istanbul, Turkey, has been another big blow to the Saudi government, which was accused of the murder. Drug offense is another major case in which the court of this country will sentence you to death, along with a list of offenses that are also based on Sharia law. Iran. Iran is believed to execute the most people per capita, even though the government alleges that some numbers are exaggerated. And they blame the need for fighting large-scale drug war for the great number of people they sentence to death. In Iran, the Sharia law stipulates capital punishment for a wide range of crimes, including rape, murder, child molestation, sodomy, and drug trafficking. And many more lesser offenses are punishable by death. Iran is responsible for over half of the executions in the world and has used death penalty for conduct that did not amount to recognizably criminal offense, such as enmity against God, spreading corruption on earth, and insulting the Prophet. Like many of the countries we've mentioned above, Iran is also accused of torturing suspects to extract confessions. Only Iran kills so many of the accused compared to the others. China. Mainland China executes more people than all other countries combined, even though Iran kills more people per capita. The exact number of people executed in China is classified as a state secret, and only high-profile cases are reported by the judiciary. A few years back, despite the sensitivity of the subject, Chinese legal experts were openly talking about the possible abolition of the death penalty, but didn't come to fruition as there was no transparency from the government on this issue. And surprisingly, the death penalty is popular in China, as some 80% of the population support the law. And China, being an economic powerhouse, has brought the argument of fighting corruption within its huge economy. And economic crimes such as bribery, drug trafficking, and embezzlement are crimes punishable by death. Before we end this video, here's a country that's just passed a new harsh criminal law that's making headlines. This country is Brunei. A tiny nation on the island of Borneo, neighboring Malaysia in South China, has just introduced a criminal law which includes death by stoning for sex between men and amputation of limbs for theft, and went into effect despite an international outcry from countries, rights groups and celebrities. And the wealthy sultan of this tiny oil-rich country said that his country is a sovereign Islamic and fully independent country which enforces its own rule and laws. Tell us what you think about the capital punishment still around in many countries, and share whether you think all countries in the world should abolish this law in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel and hit that bell button to be notified for our daily content, and thanks for watching.